The bullet split the night air 6 inches from Lyra Whitmore's head. She threw herself from her horse as the second shot shattered bark from the pine beside her, splinters cutting her cheek. Behind her, the thunder of pursuing hooves grew louder, her father's own men, hunting her like a rabid dog through the darkness. "There," a voice shouted. "She's heading for the creek." Lyra stumbled forward, her expensive riding dress torn and bloodied, the silver locket at her throat bouncing with each desperate step. Inside that locket lay proof that would save her father's life, if she lived long enough to deliver it. The men chasing her weren't trying to bring her home safely. They were trying to silence her forever. Another muzzle flash lit the desert behind her. This time the bullet found flesh, burning across her shoulder and spinning her into a wooden fence. She bit back a scream, tasting blood, and forced herself to keep moving toward the distant glow of oil lamps in the frontier town of Sweetwater Creek. She had maybe 5 minutes before they caught her. 5 minutes to find someone, anyone, who would believe that Edgar Thornton, the man her father wanted her to marry, was planning to murder them both. The boarding house ahead was her only hope, and the woman inside had no idea that in moments, her quiet life would explode into a war between 100 guns and the truth about a conspiracy that reached all the way to the railroad barons back east. Lyra collapsed against the boarding house's back door just as the sound of hoofbeats reached the edge of town. The previous evening had begun quietly enough. As twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold, Mara Sullivan moved through her small boarding house, her practiced hands lighting oil lamps against the gathering darkness. She was a widow of 32, though the harsh frontier life had carved lines around her eyes that spoke of sorrows beyond her years. Her husband had died 3 winters past in a mining accident, leaving her to run the boarding house alone in a town where survival often depended on the kindness of strangers. The wind that evening carried an unfamiliar urgency, whistling through the cottonwood trees with a sound that made Mara pause at her kitchen window. She was gathering kindling from the woodpile when a crash from the nearby alley made her freeze. The sound of splintering wood was followed by a woman's cry, sharp, desperate, and quickly muffled. Mara's heart hammered as she crept toward the sound, her late husband's old Colt Navy heavy in her hand. What she found made her breath catch. A young woman, barely more than a girl, had collapsed against her wooden fence. The stranger's fine riding dress was torn and mud-stained, dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood marking the expensive fabric. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. "Please," the girl whispered, her eyes wild with terror as they met Mara's. "They'll kill him. They'll kill my father if I go back." The words hit Mara like a physical blow. This wasn't just any runaway. The quality of the girl's clothes, the silver locket at her throat, the desperate mention of her father's life in danger. Mara's mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. Without hesitation, she holstered her gun and lifted the girl gently. "Come on, child. Let's get you inside." As Mara half-carried the stranger through her back door, she caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. The distinctive double W brand burned into the leather of the girl's riding gloves. James Whitmore's mark. She was harboring the daughter of the most powerful and most feared man in the territory. Inside the boarding house, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, Mara tended to the girl's wounds with steady hands despite her racing heart. A bullet had grazed the girl's shoulder, a clean wound but painful. As Mara cleaned and bandaged it, fragments of the girl's story began to emerge. "My name is Lyra Whitmore," the girl said through gritted teeth as Mara worked. "And if those men catch me, my father will be dead within a week." Mara's hands never paused, but her eyes sharpened. "Start from the beginning. Father arranged for me to marry Edgar Thornton, the railroad man from back east." Lyra's voice grew stronger as she spoke, anger replacing fear. "Said it would secure our water rights, bring prosperity to the territory. But I overheard Edgar talking to his associates. They're planning to kill Father right after the wedding ceremony, make it look like a riding accident. The marriage gives Edgar legal claim to everything, the ranch, the water rights, the mineral claims." As if summoned by her words, the distant thunder of hoofbeats began to echo across the desert. Mara moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. Torches flickered in the distance, riders approaching fast. "They found my trail," Lyra whispered, her face going pale. Mara made a decision that would change everything. Instead of pushing the girl toward the back door, she helped her to the small root cellar beneath the kitchen floorboards. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. The pounding on her front door came just as she smoothed the rug back over the hidden entrance. Mrs. Sullivan. The voice outside was rough, authoritative. We're looking for a young woman. About 20, brown hair, fine clothes. She might be injured. Mara opened the door to find 5 of Whitmore's men on her porch, their faces hard in the torchlight. Their leader, a man she recognized as Frank Dawson, Whitmore's head of security, stepped forward. I haven't seen anyone matching that description, Mara said calmly, though her heart threatened to beat out of her chest. Dawson's eyes swept past her into the boarding house. Mind if we take a look around? Girls hurt, might have sought shelter. I do mind, Mara replied, her voice steady. This is my home, and I haven't invited you in. For a long moment, Dawson studied her face. Then he touched the brim of his hat. We'll be back, ma'am. With more men and proper authority. That girl's dangerous. She's carrying information that could get good people killed. As the riders departed, Mara realized with crystal clarity that her quiet life in Sweetwater Creek was over. By dawn, this would no longer be about helping one desperate girl. It would be about choosing sides in a war between justice and power. Word spread through Sweetwater Creek like wildfire in dry grass. By morning, every soul in town knew that Mara Sullivan was harboring James Whitmore's daughter, and that 100 armed men were riding hard toward their main street. The town council convened an emergency meeting in the church, but this wasn't the usual gathering of civic-minded citizens debating road maintenance. Men arrived with their gun belts strapped on, faces grim with the knowledge that their decisions in the next hour might determine whether their families lived or died. Sheriff Tom Rowland stood at the pulpit, his usually calm demeanor strained. Folks, we've got a situation here that could turn ugly fast. Whitmore's men are maybe 2 hours out, and they're coming heavy. Question is, what do we do about it? Jake Morrison, the general store owner, was the first to speak up, his voice tight with fear. What we do is hand over the girl. I've got a wife and 3 young ones. I won't see them hurt over one spoiled rich girl's family troubles. That spoiled rich girl might be the only thing standing between her father and a bullet. Ellen Baker interjected, the schoolmarm's voice cutting through the murmur of agreement. If what she says is true, we're not just protecting her, we're preventing a murder. The debate that followed was unlike anything Sweetwater Creek had ever seen. Neighbors who'd shared Sunday dinners found themselves on opposite sides, their voices rising as fear battled conscience. Some wanted to barricade the town and make a stand. Others demanded Mara turn over the girl immediately. Through it all, Mara stood silent at the back of the church until Sheriff Rowland called on her directly. Mara, you started this. What do you have to say? Every eye in the room turned to her. In that moment, with the weight of the entire town's future on her shoulders, Mara made her choice. I've seen enough violence in my life, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the church. Lost my husband to it. Seen good men die over greed and power. But I've also learned that sometimes the only way to stop violence is to stand up to it, even when you're outnumbered. She paused, meeting the eyes of her neighbors. Lyra Whitmore came to me bleeding and terrified, carrying information that could save her father's life. If we turn her over now, we're not just betraying her, we're helping murderers succeed. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, Ellen Baker stood up. I stand with Mara. One by one, others rose. The blacksmith, the doctor, several of the younger men who'd served in the war. Not everyone. Maybe not even half, but enough to make a difference. Sheriff Rowland looked around the room, then nodded grimly. Then we'd better get ready. They'll be here soon. The preparation that followed was unlike anything Sweetwater Creek had ever seen. The town transformed into a fortress in a matter of hours. Barricades went up across the main street, constructed from overturned wagons and anything else that could stop a bullet. Windows were boarded up, leaving only narrow slits for rifle barrels. The saloon became an ammunition depot, the church a makeshift hospital. But it was in Mara's boarding house that the real tension built. As the afternoon wore on, Lyra emerged from hiding to help with the preparations, her presence both inspiring and terrifying to the townspeople who caught glimpses of her. You didn't have to do this, Lyra said to Mara as they loaded rifles by lamplight. These people don't even know me. They're not doing it for you, Mara replied, checking the action on her husband's old Spencer. They're doing it because sometimes you have to make a stand, or you stop being who you thought you were. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Someone shouted from the lookout post, "Riders coming in. Looks like the whole army." Mara moved to the window and peered through the gap in the boards. What she saw made her stomach clench. A sea of armed men stretching across the desert, their weapons glinting in the afternoon sun. At their head rode Cole Brennan, Whitmore's foreman, his face set in grim determination. "They're here," she called out. The final confrontation was about to begin. The moment Cole Brennan's horse stepped onto Sweetwater Creek's main street, the air itself seemed to thicken with tension. Behind him, 100 mounted men spread out in a precise formation that spoke of military training and serious intent. These weren't just cowboys. They were professional gunfighters, each one capable of ending lives with cold efficiency. Brennan rode slowly down the center of the street, his eyes taking in every barricade, every rifle barrel pointed in his direction. When he reached the middle of town, he stopped and called out in a voice that carried to every corner. "People of Sweetwater Creek, I'm Cole Brennan, speaking for James Whitmore. We've come for his daughter, and we mean to have her. Send her out peaceful-like, and we'll ride away with no harm done. Keep her from us." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the barricaded buildings. Well, that would be unfortunate for everyone. From her position behind the boarding house's front wall, Mara felt every eye in town turn toward her. This was the moment of truth, the point where brave words would be tested by the reality of 100 guns. She stood up slowly, her rifle in her hands, but pointed downward. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Mara Sullivan. I'm the one who's been caring for Miss Whitmore. Then you know why we're here, ma'am. Send her out." "I can't do that," Mara replied, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "She came to me wounded and scared, carrying news that her father's life is in danger. I won't turn her over to men who might be part of the conspiracy against him." A murmur ran through Brennan's men. Some shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. This wasn't what they'd expected to hear. Brennan's face darkened. "Ma'am, you're harboring a runaway who's caused her family considerable distress. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Let her speak for herself," Sheriff Rowland called out, emerging from behind a barricade with his hands visible but ready. "If she wants to go with you, she can. If she doesn't, that's her choice." It was then that Lyra Whitmore stepped out onto the boarding house porch. The sight of her stopped every conversation, ended every whispered prayer. She stood straight and proud despite her bandaged shoulder, her chin raised in defiance that marked her as her father's daughter. "Cole," she said, and her voice carried the authority of someone born to command. "You've known me since I was 10 years old. Have I ever lied to you?" Brennan's stern expression flickered. "No, Miss Lyra, you haven't." "Then believe me now when I tell you that Edgar Thornton plans to murder my father immediately after our wedding. I heard him talking to his men. They have it all planned. Make it look like a riding accident. Blame it on rustlers or Indians. Once father's dead, Edgar inherits everything through me." The words hit Brennan's men like a physical blow. Several of them had worked for James Whitmore for years, owed their livelihoods to him. The idea that someone would plan his murder was almost incomprehensible. "That's a serious accusation, miss," Brennan said slowly. "It's the truth," Lyra replied. "And if you take me back to father without letting me warn him first, you'll be helping Edgar succeed." The young cowhand who challenged her earlier spoke up, his voice uncertain. "But why run away? Why not just tell your father directly?" "Because Edgar's already poisoned him against me," Lyra said, pain evident in her voice. "Convinced him I'm just being hysterical about the marriage. Father thinks I'm acting like a spoiled child, afraid of my wifely duties. He won't listen to me, but he might listen to neutral witnesses." The standoff stretched taut as a wire fence in winter. Brennan looked from Lyra to his men, seeing the doubt in their faces, the questions in their eyes. These were good men, loyal to James Whitmore, and the idea that they might be helping his enemies was eating at them. Finally, the old cowhand with the scarred face spoke up. "Cole, what if she's telling the truth? What if we're helping murderers? What if she's lying?" Another voice called out. "What if this is all some scheme to avoid her responsibilities?" The debate that followed was fierce but brief. These men had ridden together, fought together, bled together. They knew each other's hearts, and they knew James Whitmore deserved their loyalty, but not blind obedience to a plan that might get him killed. Brennan made his decision. "Miss Lyra," he said formally, "if what you're saying is true, then we need to get word to your father immediately. But I can't take your word alone. Too much at stake." "Then what do you propose?" Mara called out. "Send 2 men with her, neutral witnesses who can verify her story. If she's telling the truth, we'll help protect Mr. Whitmore. If she's lying..." He left the threat unspoken. Sheriff Rowland stepped forward. "I'll go, and I'll take Jake Morrison with me. He's got no love for Whitmore, so nobody can say he's biased." The tension in the air began to ease as a solution took shape, but it was Lyra who provided the final piece. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her riding jacket. "Edgar gave me this as an engagement gift, but I found something hidden inside." She held up an ornate silver locket, but when she opened it, instead of a photograph, there was a folded piece of paper. "It's a contract with the railroad, signed by Edgar. It promises them exclusive water and mineral rights to Father's land, dated the day after our wedding." Edgar was so confident Father would be dead that he already signed the papers. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Even the most skeptical of Brennan's men could see the implications. Brennan's voice, when he spoke again, carried the weight of authority and decision. "Mount up, boys. We ride for the Double W, and we ride hard. Miss Lyra, Sheriff, you're with us. And if Edgar Thornton is really planning what you say he is..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the promise was clear in his eyes. The resolution came not with gunfire, but with justice. Within hours, a mixed party of Whitmore's men, Sweetwater Creek Sheriff, and concerned citizens were thundering across the desert toward the Double W Ranch. Behind them, the town began to dismantle its barricades. The crisis passed, but not forgotten. As the dust settled on Sweetwater Creek's main street, Mara stood on her boarding house porch, watching the riders disappear into the distance. Ellen Baker approached, her face thoughtful. "Think they'll make it in time?" Ellen asked. "They'll make it," Mara replied with quiet confidence. "And James Whitmore will finally hear the truth about the man he trusted with his daughter's future." The sun was setting over the distant mesas, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Somewhere out there, a father would learn that his daughter's apparent rebellion had actually been an act of desperate love. Somewhere out there, a murderous conspiracy would be exposed before it could succeed. And in Sweetwater Creek, a small frontier town that had faced down 100 armed men in defense of what was right, the people began to understand that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from having the courage to do what's right when it would be easier to look the other way. Mara smiled as she watched the last of the dust clouds fade into the distance. Tomorrow, Lyra Whitmore would return home, not as a captive, but as the daughter who had saved her father's life. And Sweetwater Creek would be remembered as the town that chose courage over comfort, justice over safety. The desert wind carried the sound of approaching hoofbeats again, but this time it was a single rider, a telegraph operator from the county seat, bearing news that James Whitmore was safe. Edgar Thornton was in custody, and the railroad's corrupt scheme had been exposed. The battle for Sweetwater Creek was over. The war for justice had been won. Under the vast western sky, surrounded by neighbors who had proven themselves true friends, Mara Sullivan stood on her porch and watched the stars emerge one by one, each one a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can light up the darkest night.